When Claire's family cut her out of the inheritance, they thought they had won. 3 years later, they were standing at her door begging for help. But to understand how a woman who lost everything ended up holding all the power, you have to go back to the night it began. A cold October evening, a suitcase on a wet porch, and a 5-month pregnant woman watching the only home she had ever made disappear behind a closing door. Claire Hale stood on that porch in the rain, one hand resting on the curve of her belly, the other gripping the handle of a single bag. Inside the house she had decorated, paid for, and prayed in, her husband stood with his back to the window. He did not look at her. He did not have to. The locks had already been changed that morning, while she was at the doctor hearing her daughter's heartbeat for the first time. She had come home glowing, ready to share the news. She left it without a key. For 7 years, Claire had given Daniel everything. Her savings, her time, her name on loans she never read closely, her quiet, steady belief that a marriage was something you built brick by brick, even when the other person had stopped lifting anything at all. She had told herself the distance was temporary, that the late nights were ambition, that the new car in the driveway was a sign things were finally turning around. She wanted so badly for it to be true that she stopped asking the questions any reasonable woman would have asked. So why, on the very week she should have been celebrating the daughter growing inside her, did Daniel decide she had to go? What had he learned that made a pregnant wife suddenly worthless to him? And who was the woman whose perfume Claire had smelled on his coat 3 nights before he handed her that bag? Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Because what happens next is not the story you think it is. To understand the woman on that porch, you have to understand the family she came from. The Maddoxes were the kind of family that did not announce their money because everyone in their part of Connecticut already knew. 3 generations of careful banking and quiet real estate had built a name that opened doors. Gerald Maddox, Claire's father, ran the family holdings like a man guarding a museum. Her mother, Vivian, hosted the dinners and decided, with a single lifted eyebrow, who mattered and who did not. And then there was Sloane, Claire's older sister, who had learned early how to be exactly what her parents wanted. Claire was different, and everyone knew it. While Sloane studied finance and married the son of a senator, Claire spent her summers in her grandmother's garden, learning the names of plants and the patience it took to grow them. Eleanor Maddox, Claire's grandmother, was the one Maddox who never made Claire feel like a disappointment. She would take Claire's hands, look at the dirt under her nails, and say that a person who could make things grow would never truly be poor. Claire did not understand what she meant, not for many years, not until she had lost everything else. The trouble, in the family's eyes, started the day Claire brought Daniel home. He was charming in the way that made waiters move faster and women laugh louder. He talked about his startup, his vision, the deals that were always just about to close. Gerald saw through him in about 4 minutes. Vivian saw through him in 2, but Claire saw a man who looked at her the way no one in her family ever had, like she was the most interesting thing in the room. After a lifetime of being the overlooked daughter, that attention was a kind of warmth she had been starving for. Her parents gave her a choice, and they did not soften it. Walk away from Daniel, or walk away from her place in the family. Vivian called him a fortune hunter to his face. Gerald quietly informed Claire that if she married this man, her name would be removed from the family trust, and the inheritance that had been set aside for her since birth would pass to Sloane. They expected the threat to work. They had always gotten their way with money. What they had not counted on was how much Claire wanted to be loved for herself, and how willing she was to give up everything to prove that love was real. So Claire married Daniel in a small ceremony her parents did not attend. Her grandmother came, sat in the front row in a pale blue dress, and held Claire's hand before she walked down the aisle. Eleanor whispered something to her that day that Claire would not understand until much later. She said, "Do not worry about what they take from you, because the only inheritance that matters is the kind no one can sign away." Claire smiled and assumed it was just a grandmother's comfort. She filed it away and forgot it. She was 26, in love, and certain she had chosen correctly. The first 2 years were good, or good enough. Daniel's company was small but moving, and Claire poured herself into it the way she poured herself into everything. She handled the books he could not be bothered with. She charmed the clients he was too impatient to keep. When the business needed cash, it was Claire's modest savings, the only money she had managed to hold on to, that bridged the gap. She told herself this was a partnership. She told herself that one day, when the company was big, they would look back on these lean years as the foundation of something they had built together. She believed it. She needed to. What Claire did not see, because she did not want to, was how often Daniel's stories changed. The deal that closed in March was suddenly still pending in June. The investor who loved them in the spring had never quite signed by fall. Money came into the household in bursts that never matched the work she could see him doing. When she asked, gently, he would smile, kiss her forehead, and tell her not to worry her pretty head about the details. And Claire, who had spent her whole life being told she was not the smart one, the capable one, the chosen one, let herself be talked out of her own good sense. The first real warning came in their third winter. Claire answered Daniel's phone while he was in the shower, expecting a client. A woman's voice asked for Daniel by a nickname Claire had never heard him use. When Claire asked who was calling, the line went dead. She told herself it was a wrong number. She told herself 100 small things over the next year, each one a little harder to believe than the last. The receipts from restaurants she had never been to, the hotel charge in a city he claimed he never visited, the way he started taking his phone into the bathroom and locking the door behind him. Then came the change in how Daniel looked at her, which hurt more than any receipt. The warmth that had once made her feel chosen began to cool into something closer to inspection. He would watch her across the dinner table, like a man reviewing an asset that was no longer performing. He stopped asking about her day. He started criticizing small things, the way she cooked, the friends she kept, the dreams she mentioned out loud. Claire began to shrink herself to keep the peace, choosing her words carefully, learning the weather of his moods. She did not yet know that a man who is preparing to leave often starts by making you believe the leaving is your fault. It was around this time that Claire ran into her grandmother for the last time. Eleanor was older now, frailer, but her eyes were as clear as ever. They met for tea, just the two of them, away from the family. Eleanor took one look at Claire and asked her, plainly, if she was happy. Claire opened her mouth to say yes, and instead she began to cry. Eleanor did not lecture her. She simply held her hand across the table and said that she had spent her whole life watching the family treat money like love, and Claire must never, ever make the same mistake. Then she said something Claire did not understand. She said, "When the time comes, look in the garden." 3 weeks later, Eleanor Maddox died in her sleep. At the funeral, the family wore black and spoke about legacy. Sloane read a polished eulogy about a grandmother she had barely visited. Gerald announced, to a room of grieving relatives, that Eleanor's estate would be folded back into the family trust, just as everyone expected. No one mentioned Claire. No one expected the disinherited daughter to receive anything, and she did not. She stood at the back of the room, 6 weeks from learning she was pregnant, and felt the last person who had ever truly seen her slip out of the world. She had no idea her grandmother had already changed everything. Claire found out she was pregnant on a gray morning in spring. She stared at the test for a long time before she let herself believe it. For all the cracks in her marriage, a child felt like a reason, like a thread that might pull two drifting people back together. When she told Daniel that night, she watched his face carefully, hoping for joy. What she saw instead was something she could not name at the time. A flicker of calculation, a man doing math behind his eyes. He smiled, eventually, and said the right words. But the smile arrived a beat too late, and Claire lay awake that night, wondering why the happiest news of her life had landed in their home like a problem to be solved. The pregnancy should have brought them closer. Instead, Daniel grew more distant than ever. He worked longer hours, took more trips, and grew secretive about money in a way that frightened her. Twice she found paperwork shoved hastily into drawers, documents with her name and signature on financial agreements she did not remember signing in full. When she asked, he grew angry, then cold, then strangely gentle, telling her the stress was bad for the baby and she should focus on resting. Claire wanted to believe him, but a quiet voice inside her, the same voice her grandmother had tried to wake, was beginning to whisper that the man she had given everything to was building toward something she could not see. The perfume was what finally made the voice impossible to ignore. 3 nights before everything fell apart, Daniel came home late and hung his coat by the door. Claire, passing by, caught the scent of a perfume that was not hers, expensive and unfamiliar, the kind of fragrance that costs more than a month of groceries. She said nothing. She had learned that confrontation only ended one way. But that night she lay beside her sleeping husband, one hand on her belly where their daughter turned and stretched, and she understood, finally and completely, that she was alone in this marriage. What she did not understand was how soon, and how cruelly, that loneliness would become real. It happened on a Thursday. Claire had a doctor's appointment that morning, a routine checkup at 5 months. She had asked Daniel to come, and he had said he would try, and then, as always, he did not. So she went alone, lay back on the table, and listened to the steady gallop of her daughter's heartbeat filling the room. For a few minutes, nothing else mattered. She drove home with the printout of the ultrasound on the passenger seat, rehearsing how she would show it to Daniel, hoping the sight of their child might soften whatever had hardened in him. She pulled into the driveway full of fragile hope. Her key did not fit the lock. She tried it again, thinking she had grabbed the wrong one. Then she knocked. The door opened, and Daniel stood there, calm, already dressed for somewhere else, with a packed bag of her things sitting in the hallway behind him. He did not invite her in. He told her, in the flat voice of a man reading a decision he had made long ago, that the marriage was over and that she needed to leave. Claire stood there with the ultrasound photo still in her hand, the photo of his daughter, and asked the only question that made any sense. She asked him why, and what he said next would haunt her for years. Daniel told her the truth, finally, and the truth was uglier than any lie. He had married her, he said, for the Maddox name and the Maddox money, and he had spent years waiting for her family to come around and welcome him back into the fold with all that wealth attached. He had only just learned with full certainty that it was never going to happen. Claire had been cut out for good. There was no inheritance coming, and a wife with no fortune, carrying a child that would only cost him more, was not an investment he was willing to keep. He had already found someone whose family had not made the mistake of locking the vault. He told her to be out of his life by morning. Claire did not scream. She did not beg. Something in her, some last thread of the dignity her grandmother had tried to plant, held her upright on that porch in the rain. She picked up the bag. She looked at the man she had given 7 years and every dollar she had, and she saw, for the first time, exactly what her parents had seen in 4 minutes. Then she turned and walked to her car, the ultrasound photo pressed against her chest, and drove with no idea where she was going. Behind her, The porch light went dark. Ahead of her, the road was empty, and inside her, her daughter kicked, as if to remind her that she was not, after all, entirely alone. Where do you go when the home you built throws you out, and the family you came from has already shut the door? Claire drove for 2 hours before she admitted to herself that she had nowhere. She thought about calling her parents, and the thought made her stomach turn. They had warned her. They had cut her off. Going to them now meant kneeling, and she could not be sure they would even open the door. But she was 5 months pregnant, with $40 in her account, so pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. She turned the car toward Connecticut, toward the house she had grown up in, rehearsing the words that might convince them to take her in. Vivian answered the door. She looked at her younger daughter, soaked and swollen and shaking, and for one long moment Claire thought she saw something soften in her mother's face. Then the door opened wider, and behind Vivian stood Gerald, and of all people, Sloane. They let Claire into the foyer, but no further. They listened to her story standing up, like a committee hearing a complaint. And when she finished, when she told them she had nothing and nowhere and needed help, her father said the words that ended the last fragile hope she had carried. He said she had made her choice years ago, and the family would not be cleaning up the mess that choice had made. It was Sloane who delivered the final cut, and she did it with a sympathy so thin it was crueler than shouting. She put a manicured hand on Claire's arm and said that taking her in now would set a terrible precedent, that the family had a reputation to protect, that surely Claire understood. Then she offered her a hotel room for 2 nights, paid for, as if that settled the matter. Claire looked at the 3 of them, her own blood, standing in the warm light of a house full of money, and understood that to them, she was already a story they would tell carefully at dinner parties. The disgraced daughter. The cautionary tale. She took nothing. She turned and left. The months that followed were the hardest of Claire's life, and she would later say they were also the most honest. She found a room above a flower shop in a small town she had never heard of, 3 states away from everyone who knew her name. The rent was cheap because the room was small and the heat was unreliable. The shop's owner, an older woman named Marta, who had buried 2 husbands and asked no questions, took one look at Claire's belly and her empty hands and offered her work she could do sitting down. Claire arranged bouquets, swept floors, and slept on a mattress on the floor. It was the first place in years that felt like it was truly hers. She had her daughter alone, in a county hospital, on a freezing night in January. There was no husband pacing the hallway, no mother holding her hand, no flowers but the ones Marta brought from the shop. The labor was long and frightening, and at the worst of it Claire wept, not from the pain, but from the loneliness of it. And then they placed a tiny, furious, perfect girl on her chest, and Claire forgot, for a moment, everything she had lost. She named her Eleanor, after the only person who had ever told her she was enough. Nora, she called her, and looking into her daughter's face, Claire made a quiet promise that her child would never doubt she was wanted. Money was the constant terror. Claire worked at the shop with Nora, in a sling against her chest, learning to fold roses and sleep in 90-minute pieces. Some weeks, she chose between the electric bill and groceries. She learned which food bank had the shortest line and which days the day-old bread was free. She kept the ultrasound photo taped to the wall above the mattress, not as a wound, but as a reminder of the day she chose her daughter over her own comfort. She did not call her family. She did not call Daniel, even when she learned, through an old mutual friend, that his divorce filing had quietly stripped her of every shared asset and left her with a share of the debts. She simply kept going. But something was beginning to grow in Claire during those months, and it was not only her grief. Working in that little shop, surrounded by flowers, she felt her grandmother near her in a way she had not felt since the funeral. She remembered Eleanor's hands in the garden, the patience, the way she could coax life out of the smallest seed. Claire started experimenting after hours, combining flowers in ways Marta had never tried, photographing them with a borrowed phone, posting them to an account with 11 followers. She did it because it made her feel alive. She had no idea that one of those 11 followers was about to change the course of her entire life, and that the change had roots far deeper than she could imagine. The turning point did not arrive as a miracle. It arrived as a letter, forwarded 3 times, water-stained and nearly thrown away. It was from a law firm in Boston, addressed to Claire by her maiden name, and it had been chasing her for over a year. Claire almost did not open it, assuming it was about Daniel's debts. When she finally did, sitting on the floor with Nora asleep beside her, she read it 3 times before the words made sense. The firm represented the estate of Eleanor Maddox, and it informed Claire that her grandmother, in a private arrangement made 2 years before her death, had left her something that had never passed into the family trust, something the family did not know existed. Claire's hands shook as she dialed the number. The lawyer who answered was kind and patient, and slowly the picture came clear. Eleanor Maddox had not trusted her son to do right by Claire. So, quietly, with no announcement and no will reading, she had transferred a piece of her personal fortune into a separate trust years before her death, naming Claire as the sole beneficiary, to be released when Claire turned 35, or when she became a mother, whichever came first. "The garden," the lawyer said, reading from Eleanor's own handwritten note. "She said to tell you the answer was always in the garden." Claire pressed her hand to her mouth. She had become a mother. The trust had unlocked the day Nora was born. But it was what the trust contained that left Claire breathless. Eleanor had not simply left her money. Decades earlier, before the family fortune was ever built, Eleanor had quietly bought and held a controlling interest in a small specialty company, a grower and distributor of rare ornamental plants and seeds. Over 50 years, while the family banked and traded and looked the other way, that quiet little company had grown into one of the largest privately held horticultural suppliers in the country. Eleanor had never folded it into the family holdings. She had kept it separate, in her own name, waiting. And now all of it, the company, the land, the patents, and a fortune that dwarfed the inheritance Claire had been denied, belonged to one person, Claire. Claire sat on the floor of that cold room above the flower shop and did not feel triumphant. She felt, strangely, like crying, because her grandmother had known. Eleanor had seen the family for exactly what they were, had seen Daniel for what he was, and had built a quiet safety net for the one grandchild she believed had a real heart. The answer was always in the garden. Claire understood now. The thing she had loved, the thing the family had mocked as a child's hobby, was the thing that would set her free. She held Nora close and made a second promise, harder than the first. She would not become them. The money would not turn her into a Maddox. What Claire did next is the part of the story that matters most. A different woman might have bought a mansion, hired lawyers, and burned her family to the ground. Claire did none of those things, at least not at first. She moved out of the room above the shop, but she did not move far. She made Marta a partner in the local store and kept it open. Then she turned her attention to the company her grandmother had left her, and instead of selling it, she ran it. She learned the business the way she had learned everything, slowly, carefully, with dirt under her nails. Within a year, under her quiet leadership, the company posted its strongest growth in a decade. Claire had found, at last, the thing she was good at. Meanwhile, the family she had left behind was beginning to come apart, though Claire did not yet know it. The Maddox fortune, it turned out, had been built on a foundation far less solid than Gerald let anyone believe. For years, he had been covering shortfalls with loans, leveraging the family name against debts that kept growing. When the markets turned, the whole careful structure began to give way. Sloane's senator-connected marriage, it emerged, had been a financial arrangement as hollow as her eulogy, and her husband's family pulled their support when the Maddox name lost its shine. The dinners stopped. The doors that had always opened began to close, and the daughter they had thrown away was, by then, quietly worth more than all of them combined. Daniel's fortunes collapsed even faster, and far more publicly. The woman he had left Claire for, the heiress with the expensive perfume, was named Bianca Verlaine, and Daniel had married her within months of the divorce. But Bianca's family was even sharper than the Maddoxes, and they had not built their wealth by handing it to charming men with vague business plans. When Daniel's company finally failed, as it had always been failing, Bianca's family cut him loose with the same efficiency he had once used on Claire. The prenuptial agreement they had insisted on left him with nothing. Within 2 years, Daniel had gone from one woman's husband to another woman's cautionary tale, and the money he had abandoned his pregnant wife to chase had slipped through his fingers entirely. The first to come to Claire's door was Sloane. By then, Claire had bought a modest but beautiful home near the company's headquarters, with a real garden and a sunlit room where Nora, now a bright and laughing 2-year-old, kept a small army of toys. Sloane arrived unannounced on a Sunday afternoon, her designer coat a season out of date, her confidence visibly thinned. She had heard, she said, about Claire's good fortune. She framed her visit as a reconciliation, a sister reaching out. But within minutes the truth surfaced, as it always did with Sloane. The family was in trouble, the house was being sold, their parents needed help. And surely, Sloane said, family was family. Claire listened to her sister the way she had once been forced to listen to the whole family in that cold foyer, standing up, giving nothing away. When Sloane finished, Claire asked her a single question. She asked if Sloane remembered the night Claire had come to them, soaked and pregnant and desperate, and what the family had decided. Sloane's face told her she remembered perfectly. Claire did not raise her voice. She said that she would not see her parents on the street, that she was not the person they had been to her, but she would not be reopening the vault for the people who had locked her out of it. Then she walked Sloane to the door and, gently, closed it. Gerald and Vivian came a month later, together, and it was the hardest visit of all. Her parents, who had never once apologized for anything in their lives, sat in Claire's living room looking older and smaller than she remembered. Vivian's hands trembled as she held her teacup. Gerald, the man who had calmly informed his daughter that the family would not clean up her mess, could not meet her eyes. They did not at first ask for money. They asked, awkwardly, about Nora. They asked to meet their granddaughter. And Claire, watching them, felt something complicated move through her, an emotion that was not quite forgiveness and not quite anger, but the strange grief of seeing people you once needed reduced to people who now needed you. She let them meet Nora. She watched her mother's careful composure crack as the little girl, fearless and warm, climbed into her lap and offered her a flower from the garden. She watched her father turn his face to the window so no one would see it change. And then, when Nora had gone down for her nap, Claire sat across from her parents and finally said the things she had carried for 3 years. She told them what it had been like to give birth alone, to choose between heat and food, to tape an ultrasound photo to a wall and promise her daughter she was wanted, because no one had ever made that promise to Claire. She did not say it to wound them. She said it because they needed, at last, to hear it. Gerald wept then, the first time Claire had ever seen her father cry. He told her she had been right, and they had been wrong, that they had loved money more than they had loved their own child, and that Eleanor had seen it long before any of them. Claire let him say all of it, and when he was done, She made a decision that surprised even her. She would help them, but not the way they wanted. She would not write a check to save the empire that had been built on her exclusion. Instead, she offered her mother a small house she owned near the company, and her father a quiet, honest job, no title, no pedestal, just work. She offered them dignity, the very thing they had once denied her. The reckoning with Daniel came last, and Claire had imagined it 1,000 ways. In the end, it was almost ordinary. He found her, as the desperate always do, and asked to meet. He came to her office, the office of a company he had never bothered to ask about, in a suit that no longer fit the life he was living. He had heard she was successful. He had a business idea, he said, and he thought, given their history, given Nora, that she might want to invest. He did not apologize. He did not ask about his daughter until Claire mentioned her name, and even then his interest lasted only as long as it took him to calculate whether the child gave him a claim to anything. Claire looked at the man who had handed her a suitcase in the rain, and she felt, to her own surprise, almost nothing. No rage, no longing, just a clear, quiet sadness for the years she had wasted believing he was worth them. She told him there would be no investment. She told him that Nora would always know who her father was, and that the door would never be closed if Nora herself someday chose to open it, but that the choice would be Nora's and not his. Then she told him the truth she had earned the hard way. She said that he had thrown away the only thing he ever owned that was actually worth keeping, and that no amount of money would ever buy it back. Daniel left her office that day with nothing, the same way he had left Claire on the porch years before, and Claire felt the last knot inside her finally loosen. She walked home through the early evening light, let herself into a house full of warmth, and found her daughter waiting at the window. Nora pressed her small hands against the glass and laughed at the sight of her mother, the way children laugh at the people they have never once doubted love them. And Claire understood, completely, what her grandmother had meant all those years ago. The only inheritance that matters is the kind no one can sign away. She had lost a fortune, and a family, and a marriage, and she had found something none of them could touch. Claire never did rebuild the bridge to the people she came from, not fully, and she made peace with that. Her parents lived quietly near her, and over the years a careful, modest relationship grew, built not on money or name, but on the small, honest currency of shared dinners and a grandchild's laughter. Sloane drifted away, unable to forgive Claire for the help she had been offered instead of the rescue she had demanded, and Daniel became, in time, exactly what he had always feared being, a man remembered only as a warning. Claire did not celebrate any of it. She had learned that justice, when it finally comes, rarely feels like triumph. More often, it feels like exhaling a breath you have held for years. So here is the question her story leaves behind, the one worth sitting with tonight. We are taught that the people who reject us hold all the power, that their approval is the prize, and their absence is the punishment. But what if the opposite is true? What if the moment someone shows you that you are disposable is the very moment you are finally free to become who you were always meant to be? Claire gave a man everything, and he sent her out at 5 months pregnant, and that cruelty, in the end, was the door to a life he could never have given her. If this story moved you, take a moment to subscribe so you never miss what comes next. And tell us, gently, in the comments, what your own garden might be growing while you weren't looking.